learn from this experience that you think would be helpful for next year? Like, are there things that have worked well in kind of this transition, or things that haven't worked well in this transition that you'd want to see or not see in fall if you end up back online?
I would say just definitely like some kind of check-in from certain professors, because some of them just kind of disappeared once we went online. So those classes were like are just like a little harder to access or understand, and that's where I'm kind of struggling the most. But like you have this class which we meet every week, and we have constant conversation, so it's very different. So I would just say that.
What does disappear mean?
Like we get one email from them every week saying you have to do this, 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 and then that's it. You have to read this, do this, and that. Yeah, that's. I don't know. For me, I'm not used to that, so that's a little harder for me.
Interesting. I can imagine a scenario where that instructor may think that they're just trying to lighten your load, or not kind of put extra things on your plate. Like the survey that you all filled out came back to us, and yeah, there was just a lot of different. There were a lot of different complaints, but they were like different and sometimes contradictory. And so there were some folks that are like more Zoom, other folks that are like no Zoom. Some folks were like, we want to move at our own pace, more videos. Some were like, I hate these videos. And so I think, some of that just speaks to people learn differently and have different preferences. But then also I think there's different experiences in terms on the instructor side. And so I think one of the potential like silver-ish linings, if we go on fall, is that at least people will have more time to at least think about and prepare for, what a online class looks like or should look like. So more check-ins is what I hear there, or at least consistent. Other takeaways, other things that are working, not working, that you think should be or shouldn't be implemented next semester? Is that a no? No ideas? No help? No, no feedback for us?
For me, Maribel,
I see you.
I don't like online classes. That's why I prefer in face-to-face. But if we were to go online, I also agree with Miriam. I like more check-in.
So you're okay with Zoom? That's it. Is it working for you?
Yeah, I have 2 other classes that do YouTube, and honestly, I don't really watch the videos.
Shocking. I don't think you're. I think you're more the rule than the exception there. Definitely.
Like I do watch bits and pieces of it, but they're like too long. I feel like.
How long is too long?
I think one is like 40 minutes. But see, like when we're doing Zoom, we're kind of forced to like talk. But there is just like you're listening.
Heaven forbid you just listen. It's hard. No, like all the research backs that up. That like the research tells us that, if you're doing videos, they should be kind of in that 10-ish minute range. Like 10 is usually kind of seen as like the max, maybe up until like 20. Well, that's hard to do though. And so I would say that from an instructor's perspective, and as someone who has to make videos for my other classes, like it's really hard. It's really hard to translate things, especially if you've been teaching the material in class and you're used to like a lecture format. To take a lecture that you've created that's an hour and 15 minutes, and figuring out ways to kind of effectively break that up into kind of chunks, not easy at all. Definitely not as easy as you think. Like there's not always kind of natural breaking points of like, oh, I should stop here. And so like I did a series of lectures this week around the civil rights movement, and these are just things that I'm interested in kind of personally, and it's just hard. It was hard to kind of distill that. Like I couldn't get it. I got them to like 25 minutes, and that was like a victory for me. And that meant making a lot of sacrifices in terms of just ideas that I would have wanted to go over. And so, other thing I would say, those videos are work, and so it is frustrating, to be honest. On the instructor side, is that like, I've made these videos for my other class, and I get like 5 views, and that's hours of labor to kind of write the stuff, rewrite your lectures, record it, maybe having to re-record it if you're going too long. You have to kind of break it up differently. And so there's a lot of labor, and all that's coming from like, how do I present the information, which is a hard balance, right? Because like, I think for a lecture, you're focused on information first, right? That there's an idea or something, a topic I want to cover, and I want to get this across. And you're used to having more time to do that. And so, yeah, it's definitely a learning curve to figure out how to kind of chunk those things up in ways that are not boring or more digestible for students. Uh, but yeah, it would be nice if maybe, you guys watched your videos.
Well, I don't, it's not that I had nothing against them, but I feel
Yeah.
like if they were to like write notes instead of like just talking, because my professors just talk and record themselves talk. But like for me, like that's why I like face to face, because I can whatever's written on the board I can write it down, or
Interesting.
and they just talk and talk, and honestly I do get bored.
It's hard because like, there's no, I mean, there may be things out there that work better, but it's hard because like that's hardwired into your brain if you're a professor. Like if you've lectured and you've done lecture classes, like you've lectured. And like definitely I agree that in class is much, much better because I can break up that lecture in class in ways that I can't in recording, right? So if I'm in class, I can ask you questions. I can get your feedback. I can read the room a little bit. So if I'm losing you, I can pause. I can, shift gears. There's a lot of things I can do in class. When you're recording it, like, yeah, like I don't know like what to do. Like I have my PowerPoints when I do mine. And so there's stuff to look at beyond just me talking. But it is hard because, yeah, you're trying to replicate things that you've done over and over and over again in class that have been effective, and now trying to figure out a way that makes sense and is digestible in an online format. I guarantee you, like, if your professors are anything like me, that 40-minute video, they feel like, wow, I've really condensed and I've really taken out a lot of stuff to get it to like only 40 minutes. I know I feel that way. Like the time, like if I get my lecture under 20 minutes, man, I feel like I've cut out everything interesting and just kind of got down to the bare minimum, which I don't like, right? Because I'd rather kind of go over stuff because I think they're interesting. But so it's a hard balance, definitely, and it's. I agree though, like it's not a substitute for in-class teaching. Has there been anything in that video mode that's kind of worked for you guys that you think has been effective? Is it just shorter videos, or is there anything else that, or things that go along with the videos that have helped? Or are we kind of in the Maribel camp that these are too long and why don't these people shut up already? No? No feedback?
Yeah, I think they're so long. Like I'm done doing one lecture and then he uploads another one and they're over an hour long.
Interesting. And so what's your strategy? Are you watching them?
Well, yeah, I have to force myself to. Well, he does like at first when we first started like online instruction, he would actually be in the lecture hall like writing on the whiteboard. But
Well, try to
now
be
like
doing that.
but now I'm assuming that like the campus is closed, so he's doing like slides now. But even then, it's still a lot.
Yeah, again, like I think empathy goes both ways in this time, right? That I think, you can and should expect professors to be empathetic and try to kind of work with you on things. But I think that goes the other way too, and trying to kind of find, a way to kind of appreciate respect what they're doing and kind of try to make it work to the best of your ability. My take on the videos has been they're kind of like readings for students that you only use them if like you need them, right? So if you need it for a specific assignment or for an exam, then people are watching it, which is really hard, right? Like I think for a lot of us that like for me personally, like the information is what's more important than the assignment. I know that's idealistic and not everyone is going to get on board with that, but it's hard. Like if you teach a class, it's because you've studied something and you have a particular feeling about it. or kind of connection or passion about it. And so when you're pouring that all into like your little kind of YouTube video, and then it's just like, meh, I don't need this. Like, yeah, there's a certain level. I mean, you understand it, of course, that it's not ideal, but there's definitely like a layer of frustration that comes with that. So, do you have a better alternative? Lolly will put you on the spot.
I'm thinking.
Is it just breaking up those videos into kind of smaller ones, or?
To an extent, because
Yeah.
like I have another class where she does a video, so hers has all the information, but hers are only like 10-15 minutes long.
And so it's easier for you to sit down and watch those.
Yeah. And then my other like psychology professor, like he would show videos in class, but like we wouldn't get through them because we can't watch all the videos. And now he's assigning videos that are like 2 hours long. I'm like, this wouldn't even be able to be done if we were in class.
These are like documentaries or something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Anything else that you've seen work or not work?
Yeah, so one of my teachers will post like her like PowerPoint slideshow and then put an audio for each slide. So it's not really like a certain, like it doesn't say how long it is exactly, but so I'll like download it and then I'll take my notes and I'll delete the slides as I go. And if I need to stop, it's not like I'm in the middle of a video or anything.
Wait, say that again. So you have two
So
separate files?
yeah, so I'll like download her slideshow, and the
Okay.
slideshow, like each slide, she's made like an audio to go with it. So you like play her audio, and it's like in the slideshow already, like in the PowerPoint when you download it. So there's like a little thing in the corner that's like a little like audio thing, and you click it, and it plays her audio, so you can listen to her do like her lecture, and then like take your notes or whatever.
That's interesting.
I really like.
So the idea is that like, if I want to know what's on bullet point 1, I can go to that part of the audio?
Maybe not bullet point, but like you can listen to slide 1 and it's like
Okay.
its own thing, and it's maybe like a 4-minute audio, and then the next slide is like completely separate and has its own audio about that slide.
Interesting.
So it's not like this huge like hour-long presentation that you have to listen to at once. It's more like broken up into like 4-minute sections.
That's interesting. And that's a single file, or?
Yeah, it's all like the audio is, once you download the PowerPoint, like the audio's with it. So
So what kind of file are you downloading?
I think she uses PowerPoint, but I have a Mac, so it just goes on to like what is it, Keynote?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but it's like a PowerPoint file.
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. I can see that. Like there are, I don't know if YouTube does this. I know there are other programs that you can kind of do that video-wise to kind of basically create like time logs. And so like this material is covered at, the 10-minute mark. This is at the 15-minute mark, that kind of stuff. That's an interesting idea of, yeah, kind of breaking it up so it doesn't feel like a single thing. Interesting. Other ideas or other things that have worked, not worked?
I think I just want like consistency from what platforms we'll be using, just because so many platforms can be confusing. I don't know to anyone else, but to me, like getting a notification, like an email, and then Canvas, and then like new notification, like geez, like just focus on one, because then I'm just getting 1,000 notifications, and then throughout the whole week, it's just like, which one do I actually pay attention?
Interesting. So is it just like Canvas and email? Is there other things that you're getting stuff from?
No, just those two.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath. I mean, some of that is just, yeah, there are certain professors for a lot of reasons, they either do or don't like Canvas. Yeah, like I tend to kind of follow the lead of students. Students are messaging me through Canvas, I'll respond to Canvas. If you're emailing me, I'll respond in email, or try to. Yeah, I think what you're seeing there, though, is that that side of the university of like the kind of course management side is definitely kind of all over the map. And so there are people that like, had used Blackboard for years and just like that and are resistant to Canvas. There are people that just don't like the way the campus does things. There are people that really like the way the campus does things and kind of buy all in. And so, yeah, I think that lack of consistency is definitely kind of already there, but it's definitely magnified when now we're all reliant on kind of online stuff. Interesting. Any other gripes, Vince? Things that are working? All right. Couple orders of business here. My original goal and plan was to have your first draft due Friday. Thoughts on this? Is this doable? Where are you at in your process? Yeah, what do we think about this Friday?
Can we do it on Sunday?
Sunday.
Sunday
would be nice.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're
My
procrastinating?
hours went up at work.
Not my concern. I'm kidding.
I thought it was the 5th.
Say it again.
I thought you said the 5th a while ago.
You got all pixelated in your voice. Okay.
Sorry, I thought you said that we would be turning it in on the 5th.
I said that?
Yeah.
Who said that? When? When did I say that?
No, I thought you. No, you didn't say the 5th. You said the 1st.
Yeah,
Like
I
from
mean,
what
it
I
sounded like the 5th, but originally I definitely posted the 1st because that was the original idea.
Yeah.
Though I'm actually not opposed to the 5th, if that helps. My not my concern, but the thing that I'm thinking about here is the goal of having like an assignment or due date earlier was to get you more time to kind of review each other's work, and then to give you more time to work on a final draft. So that was the ultimate. That was the ultimate kind of idea that push the due date for the first draft. More than a week before the final draft is due, so that way you get the benefit of feedback and then time to kind of work on editing. Again, this is the kind of sacrifice that in this kind of transition, but this assignment in general is definitely built around the idea of multiple drafts. And so I try to simplify that just because of the sake of everything else we're going through. But I'd still want to keep some element of the drafting so that you're kind of moving through multiple versions of the essay rather than just kind of doing it once and then submitting it. Again, I'm not opposed to the 5th if that's kind of where we're at. Anyone oppose that idea of putting it to the 5th for the first draft?
If it was on the 5th, when would the final draft be due?
So I'm looking at finals week, probably ideally like Wednesday, Thursday-ish at finals week, so I have time to read through all of these. But it would definitely be during finals week, and so next week is the week before finals week. And so if it's on the 5th, that's a Tuesday, then yeah, probably like a little over a week.
Are we still going to have to do the mega cognitive essay?
Yes.
Is that one due on like the day of the final?
I'm trying to have that due Sunday of finals week, like Sunday before finals week. It's a reflection essay. So it's kind of you reflecting on yourself. So you don't have to do any reading for that. And so the idea is it shouldn't be like a high stakes assignment. It's just kind of a last opportunity for you to think about. And you'll have plenty to think about kind of what you've been through this semester and kind of what's happened with your writing across all of this. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts about this? Every 5th, is that? Go ahead.
If you pushed the first draft due date to the 5th, but like I'm already almost done, could I send it to you to read?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of that question? If you already have a draft.
Yeah, could I send it to you to look over?
I was adding to my labor. Short answer is yeah. Actually, that's on the table for anyone. What I
you.
can do, and what I think I'll probably end up doing, is open that link, you know, like by Friday, so that people that have early drafts can submit that, and then maybe we can kind of get peer review going for like in waves. And so if there are a couple other early folks, and then you all could work together, and then again, I'm happy to kind of read drafts. If I'm going to read drafts, my preference at this point is probably to kind of meet again over Zoom, rather than just kind of having you email it to me and then me edit it and give you feedback. That rarely works, to be honest. I don't like it. Over the years, I've done that. You end up putting a lot of labor in editing. And then research tells us this, but also my own experience tells me this, that students don't really read feedback unless you're like telling them, ideally to their face. And so, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And so if we're going to go that route, my preference then is to set up like a Zoom meeting so we can actually discuss a draft like in real time. And so you can, you know, if we do that, I'd have you send it to me early so I can kind of read through it and then we kind of go over it. For me, ideally, that's not a substitute for peer review. That's like in addition to. And so I'd still like you to go through the peer review process. And so, yeah, I can open up the link early, and then it just, if you're done early, then you're done early. And then you can submit it, and then I can help organize the peer review process from there. Any objections to this as a plan? So having this due on the 5th. If people have it done earlier, I'll have that link open so you can submit it and then try to get some peer review done.
So we'll only have the first draft and a final draft?
Required, yeah.
Okay.
If you want to do more than that, you're welcome to, but it's not required.
Okay.
So if you want to get your peer review and then kind of meet with me and then kind of take a second crack at it, that's fine, but not required. Encouraged, but definitely not required. Yeah, any other thoughts about this plan?
Sounds like a good plan.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, again, I'm okay. Like the other part of this then is I'll need you guys to kind of be on top of the peer review. And so again, the hope is that you get some feedback and that you have time to kind of adjust to that feedback for your final draft. And so that's contingent on folks kind of reading each other's essays and then giving that feedback. Has anyone used the peer review function on Canvas out of curiosity? Lots of no's. Anyone? Peer review? And so my understanding of this, I haven't used it, I've just seen it. But my understanding is that I'll be able to kind of set up kind of the shell for you to respond to. And what I'm looking for in peer review is just your general feedback. And so you're not there to grade it or to edit the essay. It's just kind of you read it as a general reader. What's your feedback? What makes sense to you? What's working? What's not working? And so kind of like we did with peer review around the corporate power stuff, I'll give you guide questions to work off of, and then you'll just answer those questions. And so then your partner has something to work off of as they transition into their final draft. Yeah. All right. Any other questions, concerns about that? Other order of business, and I know this is going to crush you, so apologies in advance. But I've been toying with the idea of cutting the third topical précis. Thoughts on this? Is this going to really rob you of your opportunity
Sounds
to
amazing.
express yourself? What's that?
Sounds amazing.
Amazing. I don't know if I like that response.
Yeah.
Why, Isaiah? What's?
It leaves us more time to do our other assignments for other classes.
But then you lose an opportunity to like just really express yourself and apply your knowledge of course materials to writing. No? No? Any objection to this? Going once, going twice. And here I thought you guys cared about learning for the sake of learning, but you just care about grades and assignments. Not the one you just turned in, though. The third one that was assigned originally. All right, so we can, I can cut that. The trade-off again is just will be to make sure you get that peer review done, ideally within a day or two after the 5th, so that everyone has enough time to again benefit from the feedback. Yeah. Any other questions about this? So we'll cut topical prey C3. What that means you would have left then is the first draft and then the final draft of the research project. And then that metacognitive, which again is just kind of a reflection essay. And then you would be done. So kind of 2, I guess 3, count both drafts, assignments. And yeah, then we'll get you off into the summer. Yeah, any issues, questions here? I'll be posting the assignment link for the metacognitive soonish. I had to figure out what I want to do with this. Normally what I would do is basically the kind of prompt for that is more or less kind of who are you as a writer now. So what I like to do in normal circumstances is have you, as I usually give you back the essays that you wrote at the beginning of the class. And so those of you that were here wrote an essay about who you were as writers. And so usually I like to give you that back and have you use that to kind of respond to in this essay. I have to figure out if I'm going to do that. That means either scanning or taking pictures of all that and then sending them all to you individually, which is, again, kind of a lot of labor. But I'll kind of have to work that out, and then I'll let you know in the assignment link. Or you can do your best to try to remember what you wrote. Yeah, but I'll be posting that soonish. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Going once, going twice. All right. Other sections were able to tangent me until like the hour mark, so you guys are slipping. Lost your chance. We really pushed it. Yeah. So to summarize that, then we'll push the first draft for the research project of the 5th. Final draft we do during finals week, and then we'll cut the topical précis. And then the trade-off there is to make sure that you're following through on the peer review. And so once that goes up and everyone starts turning assignments in, I think what I have to do is just kind of assign you into individual partners to then kind of do the peer review. Yeah. Kat, hello. All right, let's talk about healthcare. Very topical. Where are we at on time? I think we'll just do this as a group. Let's kind of power through. And so the idea here is to think about healthcare in that kind of sociological imagination way, with a particular focus on like structures and institutions. So I think that's the kind of theme that runs through a lot of these readings about healthcare overall, but also universal healthcare in particular. So some of the big questions that we're after here is kind of how the articles define and discuss healthcare. So which aspect are they focusing on and kind of calling attention to? We can also think about the specific critiques of the healthcare system that these articles offer and or the solutions that they offer. And then one kind of large question to think about with all of this is to remember some of that Derber stuff and think about how we would apply that kind of analytical frame to these topics. I'm going to shift gears here. And let's take a look at this. Is that showing up? Yeah, all right. So we got a chart here. Lots of moving parts here. We got lines, we got colors, we got thickness of lines, we got money over on the left, and we got life expectancy on the right here. Any takeaways? Anything that stands out in this graph? Any details that jump out at you or just you think are interesting here?
To me, it was finding the US line. Like I was trying to find it where all the nations were, but it's like above the title and everything.
Yeah, so where is the US here? We are a red line, and we are very literally, in the most literal sense of the term, off the chart. Why are we off the chart? Like, why are we up here? Like, what's the distinction that's being made here?
Like how much we spend on health care per person.
Yeah, our cost of care is almost double our nearest kind of similar country. And so Switzerland's at 4,400, we're at 72. So not quite double, but pretty close. What else do we learn about the US from this line? We're spending a lot. Yeah, what else do we learn here?
We don't like to go to the doctor, or like don't visit the doctor as much.
Yeah, so the thickness of the line matters here, and because our line is pretty thin, what that tells us that is that we're not going to the doctor very often in any given year. What else do we learn about the U.S.? So we're spending a lot. We're not really going to the doctor much. What else do we learn here?
For the amount of money like we spend on healthcare, we don't have like we're below the average life expectancy.
Yeah, our life expectancy is definitely not as high as kind of similar nations in terms of economics. When we find the U.S., our life expectancy is here. And so the only ones that are lower, let's see, we're looking at the Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, Hungary, and then Poland and Mexico. All those countries, more or less, are developing countries, or developing-ish. So how do we make sense of this? Why are these factors coming together here in the U.S.? Like, why is our life expectancy lower? Why aren't we going to the doctor? Why is our cost more? What's the story here? Yeah, any thoughts here? Like, what's any of those variables? Like, what's going on here? Or the ways that these variables move together? Go ahead.
Probably because we're not engaging in preventative care, and what happens as a result of that is that people develop chronic conditions like hypertension and diabetes, and then that care becomes very, very expensive.
Yeah, definitely if you're treating it like kind of at its kind of like crisis moments versus early on. Yeah, I think this is a big part of this, that the not going to the doctor is particularly relevant when we talk about chronic conditions. That can kind of address some of these issues of cost, definitely, right? That the things that we're paying for tend to be more expensive than kind of going to the doctor often and kind of catching things early. And, preventative stuff is cheaper than dealing with things where they're, again, kind of in crisis moment. If that's the case, why don't we go to the doctor more as a country, as a nation? So if we know it's better for us to go often, yeah, why don't we go more?
Cost?
Cost? So play that out a little bit more than that. Like, where are some of the costs that are maybe stopping people from going to the doctor?
Yeah, well, if you don't have health insurance, then, I mean, they're even in the throes of this COVID disaster. There were people that would call our 211 line and didn't know where they could go, didn't have health care, didn't know where they could go to get tested, didn't want to go pay to get tested. So, yeah, that's a big barrier for people, cost.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple barriers there. One is just healthcare itself. Do you have it? But even if you do have it, like the kind of cost of copays and whatnot, definitely kind of play into this, right? And so this is, again, there's kind of a chicken egg argument here. Is the cost driving the lack of doctor visits? Is the lack of doctor visits driving the cost? Probably a mixture of both, right? But these things are definitely correlated. That again, some of our cost is tied to, again, kind of our health habits and kind of doctor habits in general. Okay. What else do we learn from this graph if we look at other countries? What are some of the other patterns here?
I thought it was really interesting that Japan, they go to the doctor more frequently than most of the other countries, and it's relatively cheap, and they live typically longer lives than a lot of these other countries.
Yeah, I mean, longer than any of them. They have the highest life expectancy, which is, yeah, it's definitely interesting, right? That it calls into question like how these things relate to each other. That, I mean, there's a variety of factors to that, but I think it definitely speaks to this kind of like healthcare issue that in part, like the costs are probably lower because people are going to the doctor more, right? That if they're going to the doctor more, again, they're catching conditions earlier and treating them when they're cheaper than waiting for them to kind of be, particularly expensive. Um, Interesting. So yeah, Japan is an interesting kind of line here that spending less than its kind of counterparts in the kind of developed world, much less here. So we're looking at 2,500 per person versus the U.S. was a 72. But again, even cheaper than countries like Britain and the Scandinavian countries, but living longer. Um, Interesting. Any other patterns or kind of trends here stand out to you?
Definitely, I think of like when I see the cost of like healthcare for a single person in the U.S., I think of like big pharma and just all those companies that just basically like take in money from people who are sick. And so yeah, that just comes to mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to this in a second, kind of like the why of all of this. The other thing I would note about this, and so we have kind of the lines, the thickness of the lines, but also the color. And so the other big distinction here, you can pick up on this, green versus red here. Ouch.
I dropped my cup.
Dropped your cup?
One line has, yeah. One of the lines, the green line is ones that have national health care, and the red ones is the ones that doesn't.
Yeah, and so these are still like private systems. So it's basically us in Mexico. All these other countries have some version of a universal national health care. I think when you put all this together, definitely from the perspective of the US, it looks like we have a system that's expensive, which it is. We have a system that seems to disincentivize people from going to the doctors, which is not good. And this seems to be translating, at least in part, or contributing to lower life expectancies. So the million-dollar question is, why do we still have this? Why do we have a system that seems to be expensive and inefficient and not particularly helpful in terms of health data? Yeah, why do we still stick with this model? So I think what Miva's starting to get into, I think, is relevant here. There's a couple of different ways to take this. Yeah, thoughts here? Like, why do we persist in this model?
You have policies and laws and loopholes. I would say when I was reading the one about how Barack Obama was trying to pass, the healthcare and all that stuff. Just it was basically like Democrats versus Republicans, and it was just like that was a big center of it all. Basically, it was more of a debate between them two rather than like what's best for the people.
So this gets wrapped up into kind of political baggage, I think, is part of this, definitely. Other ideas here or other contributing factors that kind of keep this around if it doesn't seem to be working particularly well? I think there's definitely like a Derber read here. Like, what would be the Derber read here? what's the kind of structural side of this? Like what's either opposing like change, or what's keeping the kind of status quo the same? Yeah, well, who are some of the other players here, I guess would be the question.
Would it be profit? Because we have a healthcare that's fee for service.
So profit, definitely. And so what are some of the effects of that profit, or what are some of the ways that that profit is being spent? I guess would be another question. So in this kind of Derber read, that's always step one, is kind of figuring out who's making money. So actually, I'll start there. Who, in general, who is making money off of this system?
Hospitals and doctors and
So hospitals.
pharmaceuticals.
Go ahead, Annette.
Hospitals, doctors, and pharmaceuticals. You're going to find whenever, like when President Obama was trying to pass the Affordable Care Act, the biggest opponents are the people who stand to lose the most, and pharmaceuticals are huge, and hospitals.
Yeah.
So that would be my.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like there are.
And
Go ahead.
under social medicine, the reimbursement. That was going to be my point, but I kind of lost it for a second. Under social medicine, reimbursements are consistent with what you would see now under like Medi-Cal programs and Medicare programs. So the reimbursements are less. And so when the Affordable Care Act came out, you saw doctors instantly post on there. My doctor even posted on her on the front door that they were not taking covered California patients.
Wow.
So it's all about those reimbursements.
Yeah, so it's profitable to go kind of treat other patients, or more profitable to treat other patients who have kind of traditional healthcare plans. Yeah, no, I think there's definitely, again, not terribly difficult to follow the money here. That there are people that are making, substantial profits off of the system. In that Derber read, then how do they protect this? And so if you have those people who are opposing Obamacare, like what kind of resources do they have to oppose it? Good question.
Don't they have super PACs?
I mean, among other things, yeah. And so the idea that you can influence politics here, and I think with healthcare, you see how that influence works. Like you take something that's statistically, at least, when surveys are done on this, is pretty unpopular, and you're able to kind of just fight back against every effort to kind of change it. And so I think the politics here and the kind of economics of kind of who's benefiting from this definitely answers part why this sticks around. Are there other factors, other things that are shaping like why we hold on to this system rather than just kind of jumping to a universal healthcare plan? So I think we got some politics here. I think just kind of people not wanting to lose profit are parts of this. Other aspects here? No? Other big picture things? I would add culture, I think, to a degree here. Any thoughts on that? Like culture and kind of healthcare or perceptions of healthcare? For example, one of the articles asked you to kind of read about like the British system, but a lot of it is kind of like our perceptions of this. From the article, just things that you've heard over time, like what is our perception of like these healthcare plans in Britain or Canada or elsewhere in the world, these universal healthcare plans?
I mean, like I've talked to older relatives about like the idea of healthcare for all, and they think that that means that everyone is going to have like the exact same thing, and that means that they think that they won't be able to access like quality basically. So there's this like this misconception that if there's universal healthcare, that means that everyone has the exact same thing and you can't like go pay for a private one if you want to. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so there's a fear of like some kind of trade-off of like quality. Yeah, definitely that's something that comes up a lot, that, you know, you won't get to pick your doctor and you won't get to kind of have, you know, basically if you have money, you're not able to kind of like jump the line. I think is where a lot of those critiques kind of boil down to. Other critiques that we tend to have of like universal healthcare in other countries, like this kind of question of quality, I think is always there. Man, this is the other thing that sucks about teaching. This came up in the last section, and I realized that I think those Obamacare debates are like 12 years old now. I didn't remember when this was being like debated and kind of discussed in the media when Obamacare was being passed. Damn kids. But this was debate, and like one of the things that was on the table in that debate was a universal healthcare plan. And so I think you heard these critiques, right, that we were going to lose quality if we go that route. Any other critiques that come to mind that we tend to kind of throw around for universal healthcare plans? Or concerns that we have about it? No, you guys are just young and just buying into these ideas. I mean, I think quality or versions of quality probably kind of captures a lot, like the idea that you're going to be waiting in line a long time and that kind of stuff. If you go back and read a lot of the stuff around Obamacare, like kind of in the media, in the kind of political discussions around it, I think a lot of this, and I think the other, I would understand the other undercurrent of like what Chloe's referencing for generationals, I think this also has the kind of like tinge of like socialism. And for a long time, that was kind of very much a bad word in American politics. And so calling something socialist was definitely a way to kind of try to discredit it. And I think universal healthcare has always kind of had to fight that fight, right? That it has this, it's been branded as socialist or communist, stuff like that. And so I think there's cultural baggage here that plays into this. Some of that I think is what Mia was saying is just kind of Democrat versus Republican. That these are ideological debates about like what we should be doing as a country, and is it American to have subsidized healthcare kind of stuff. And so I think a lot of times this boils down to kind of accusations that these things are, again, too socialist or too communist or what have you, or not American enough, that this is not the free market. I think that goes a long way for a lot of people, or at least it used to. I think one of the kind of interesting questions now is that changing? And so do those kind of attacks that these are socialist plans, do they carry the same weight as they would have even like 12 years ago? Again, you know, the success of Bernie Sanders to me is interesting. So even though he doesn't get nominated, the idea that he could even present himself as a socialist and not have that be like the end of the campaign is really interesting to me. Like to me, it implies at least our understanding of these things are changing, and we're starting to shift a little bit at least around these ideas. Do we have any thoughts about that generationally? Do you guys feel like you have? Maybe you're the wrong people to ask, but does that word or that terminology, socialism, does it have a negative connotation still?
I feel like I don't know. I feel like just this generation that's coming up, I feel like it's not as much negative. I feel like we're kind of pushing towards it. A lot of the supporters for Bernie were young people, or you know, the younger generations, and so it's like they're all just kind of pushing and pushing and pushing for more equality. So I don't know. It's definitely not as negative, but you do still have those older generations that.
Dang.
Yeah,
throwing the old people under the bus.
Well, I mean, you know, it's true though. You know, like back in the 60s, 70s, like you couldn't, you know, you just couldn't do that. It's very different, very different.
Anyone feel like they see anything different? Like, do you feel like even among your generations, there's still kind of pushback against socialism as a concept, or plans that are labeled as socialist?
I know people who think if America had like Bernie Sanders be this type of president, then it was going to mean that America was going to become communist. So, which just can't happen, wouldn't happen. So just, I think, because I mean, in school you're taught like we spent so long fighting communism and it's like terrible. So like, and no one really, I feel like people don't even really know what it is besides the fact that it's bad.
That's interesting. Like, do you feel like your generation, was that still the narrative?
I think socialism is less like viewed as just bad, but I think people are still like, because the word communism just like sounds terrible. People relate it with like these regimes with like dictators that were very bad, but that's not really what like communism stands for. It's just happened to have some bad people related to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like any ism, there's a lot of different examples of it. Interesting. I'm interested in this tangent. Other folks, like in school, do you feel like this was still like communism was taught as like the bad thing? Interesting. I kind of, I don't know why. I just kind of assumed that maybe that was starting to decrease a little bit, but maybe it's still there. But yeah, like if that's the case, I think that reinforces the argument, right? That the idea that these things have kind of cultural baggage as well. And I think at each step, that each time we've tried to put universal healthcare in place, and there's about four main kind of moments where we almost get there. Like this kind of narrative around like socialism or communism definitely like pops up, right? And it's effective, right? That again, even as recent as Obamacare, like this was the main, I think, critique about what was called the public option, right? That this was again a bad option. We would get inferior care. It would raise our taxes, like these kind of things, and that's not what we do as Americans. And so again, like how much that cultural baggage plays, and kind of is it equal to like the money that you know people are spending in super PACs and kind of lobbyists? Maybe, maybe not. But I think it's definitely part of the kind of goes into the gumbo, as it were. As a side note, it always interests me that people were calling Bernie Sanders a socialist or even like a communist. Like maybe by American standards, but like Bernie Sanders wasn't even like a mainstream socialist by like kind of European standards. It's just that like he fit into a very specific pocket here that felt like it was a huge change from the norm, and it was. But like if he was a socialist, he's very much like socialist light. Like there are people there are actual socialists in this country and elsewhere that have very different ideas about kind of the extent that you put those policies. And so there's a question of whether he's even socialist. Definitely the idea of him being communist as a millionaire, kind of off the table. But yeah, like I think these kind of frames and these narratives, I definitely think play a part in this. Any other thoughts why we kind of hold on to this system if it doesn't seem to be working particularly well and people don't usually like it?
I have a quick question for
Sure.
like you. Like, do you feel like if you're like, let's say if you're like the top percent, do you feel like you can't necessarily fight the 1% if you're part of it?
Can you change the system from within?
Yeah.
That's a complicated question. I don't know. I think you can you can have an impact. I think there is kind of a natural barrier to how far you're willing to kind of have that impact go. Like, are you going to topple a system that you are very much in and benefit from? I don't know. I think it's hard to. I think it's definitely hard to do from within because you get, you just kind of get institutionalized to a degree. That's my read. That's kind of cynical, but like as a historian, like you see this time and time again that like even if you study like radical movements, again there's an academic term called hegemony, and we talked about this before. But the kind of gist of this is the idea of kind of common sense and kind of soft power. And so one of the ideas in hegemony is that like the structures of power find ways of absorbing things that are critical of it. And so you see this around like civil rights, for example, that a lot of the more moderate civil rights leaders are kind of, in many cases, very literally pulled into government and end up kind of defending the federal government and the U.S. nation state. And then the more radical parts of that movement are kind of pushed off to the fringes. I think you see that with like environmentalism. I think you've seen that in the women's movement. I think you've seen that in a lot of even working class movements. And I think because of that, yeah, it's hard. Like once you're in it, like you're in it. And at the very least, you're complicit. And there are ways to kind of, own your complicity and kind of use it to your advantage. I tend to think that's more the exception than the rule, but that's me. I don't know, do you have thoughts, Mia, or anyone else?
I agree.
Inside?
No, I agree. I was just wondering because you mentioned that like Bernie being a millionaire, like having all that money, like how true is he to his word? So yeah, I agree though.
I mean, it's hard. Like it's hard getting it. Like it's easy to be critical in general. I think overall, it's easy to kind of find faults in things and kind of tear them down. It's hard to be constructive and to kind of build something because once you start building and kind of looking for ways to kind of participate in these things, you're in it. And once you're in it, it's harder to now be the outside voice. I think you see this in every single presidential election, right? That especially people that are looking for it to be elected the first time, their message is always the same. I'm going to come in, I'm going to change things. Like this is horrible. I can't believe they're doing X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do A, B, and C instead. And they get into power, and what do? They end up doing the same things, right? So I think, and then once they're in it, though, like you'll see in this campaign, like Trump's whole campaign coming in was, I'm an outsider. I'm going to, drain the swamp, whatever. And now his whole campaign is going to be, look how great we are doing things. It's not going to be, we need to tear everything down. It's that we've put better things in place, and now we need to keep it in place. So I think there's just something natural to a degree about that. Like once you're in it, you kind of end up kind of defending it, and then you lose some of that critique. That's not always a bad thing, though. I think sometimes it's easy to be on the outside looking in, being critical, and then sometimes sometimes the proposals are overly simplistic because you really don't know how things run. But it is, yeah. I think the ideas of institutionalization are really fascinating, and I tend to think that yeah, people in power or power itself has a way of absorbing things that are threatening to it and kind of weaken it. That was deep. Other thoughts on this? Maybe there's more optimism. This is kind of a low Derber kind of argument. Other thoughts on this? Are there ways to kind of, is it more effective to change from the inside?
After this discussion, I don't think it is anymore.
I swayed you? I made you cynical? Damn
Yes.
I mean, there are, again, like it depends on, like a lot of these things, I think it depends on what your metric is. And so what are you actually looking to do? And so, people have done legitimately good things, I think. And I think this is Loeb's argument. Sometimes you don't always see that because it's at a very local level. Yeah, I guess the uncynical part of this is that people have done, we have made progress in some degree. Things are better for at least certain people than they would have been a century ago. Yeah, I think about this a lot, like in terms of academia, to be honest, that you end up in the same kind of trap that if you look at a lot of, at least in the humanities and social science, a lot of those academics kind of get their foundation as critics, right? Are really kind of looking at what's wrong with an institution or a field that they're coming into. But then they end up in those fields and they end up kind of, worrying about getting tenure. They end up worrying about, keeping their paycheck rolling, and they have kids, and you have to, like we talked about this last week around residential segregation. Like sometimes it's hard to imagine what the solution is. Like when you look at something like schooling, and that we have this very real problem that if we can have high schools that are 2 miles apart in Fresno and have very different realities. If you have a kid, what's your solution? You kind of do the right thing and try to go to the kind of worst school and try to make it better by, putting yourself on the ground and investing your time and energy and volunteering? Or do you take the easier route and say, you know what, I'm just going to move down the road and get my kid into that better school because I want them to have better opportunities? And that's really hard. No one wants their kid to be a social experiment, right? And so I think like that's really the rub there. Like, are you willing to kind of sacrifice something for principle? And how much are you willing to kind of, give up or, not maybe advance? But you guys are all different because you're all social majors and you want to change the world. So yeah, you'll be the exception. Other thoughts on this thread here of kind of change and, one of my kind of favorite moments in grad school, especially in history, 90% of it is you just kind of ripping apart like other people's work. Like you read books and articles, you're like, oh my God, how could they not talk about X, Y, and Z? Like, how dumb are they to think that this is still true? How come they don't know this theory? Da, 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 da. And so like we had been doing this in this class like all quarter, and my professor just got really frustrated. And he's like, you know what? Like these are like actual books, and these are people that have devoted a lot of time into their research. It's been edited multiple times, and it's easy for you to critique, but like, what have you created? And it was kind of a really petty kind of point, but like it really stuck with me because I think it's easy to be critical, and being critical is important. But like, what can you create and what are you creating? I think is a valid question mark. And I think sometimes we, like in academics, you see this where we kind of eat the old. That if it's an older idea, by default, it's got to be a bad idea. Right? It's got to be about the new theory, the newest kind of book on this topic, the newest article on this topic. And sometimes I think you lose something there. I think you see this in movements too, that we just assume that older generations were fine then, but they're not good now, right? And so I think sometimes that works against you because you don't really build off of those things and it becomes these really divisive kind of movements. Yeah, was that cynical enough? Is that kind of make you feel bad about the future? Prove me wrong, I think is the adage here. Yeah. So healthcare, yeah, what's up with that? But honestly, I think a lot of this applies to healthcare in kind of trying to make systemic change. That these things are hard to do. That I think the Obamacare debates, I think, really capture a lot of this. That there were people that wanted an expanded kind of universal healthcare option, and some of those people again had that principle, but then had to kind of compromise, right? That to get what we got, which is Obamacare, I think a lot of people who wanted something more had to kind of consistently kind of give up on some of these things to get anything. And I think that's both a risk of kind of working on the inside, that to kind of get anything done, you're going to have to compromise something. But you can argue it's also a good thing, right? That it kind of allows you to kind of see different sides and maybe come up with some solution. But I think when it comes to something like healthcare, we end up keep getting these kind of like watered down alternatives to like a public healthcare option. Right. I think there was something else here. Speaking of politics, the other article I asked you to read was the conservative case for a single-payer healthcare reform. Ideas here, like what is the conservative argument for actually adopting single-payer? So we tend to think of conservatives as opposing this. What is the conservative argument for adopting this? Like a universal healthcare? No takes?
Will cost more in the end because there'll be fewer options.
Say that again, Annette. So if we adapt public healthcare, what's the argument there?
What is the argument? I'm multitasking.
It's all right.
Sorry. The argument is that you will have no choice. You will have no choice in what doctor you go to. You won't have access to quality care. You won't have access to specialty care. Healthcare will go down the tank. It'll end up costing us more. I didn't even read the conservative article. It's just I already know what it says.
So actually, kind of the opposite. Sorry, not to throw you under the bus.
Oh, we should have read it.
So that's, I think what you're laying out is the traditional conservative opposition to this. What this article is trying to say is that actually there is a conservative angle on this where it actually makes sense to actually adopt a universal health care. Any thoughts there? Like, what would be a conservative case for this? A lot of it goes back to that graph that we started with, that what we have right now is almost prohibitively expensive. And so what this article is kind of hinting at is that actually shifting over to a public option is probably going to save more money for governments in the long run, right? That we cut off some of the kind of extreme costs. Like right now, you know, federal and state and county governments have to cover uninsured people, at least in part, if they're going into clinics and hospitals, and they can't pay for those things. And so that feeds into the cost. And the idea is that, again, from a conservative perspective, you can streamline some of that with this program that might kind of actually make healthcare cheaper, in part because what we have right now is just so overwhelmingly expensive compared to other nations. Yeah. Okay. General thoughts on your healthcare? Have you guys had a positive experience, negative, somewhere in the middle? Yeah, what's been your healthcare experience? I know you guys are young and immortal, so you don't go to the doctor. But if you have gone, like, yeah, do you feel like you've had a good experience? Yeah, what's your general take on healthcare?
I just know doctors in the valley generally just kind of suck.
Wow. Shots fired. Why?
There's this one time where I had a cyst growing on the inside of my lip, and they kept sending me to a doctor to get referrals several times. It was one referral after another. Like, no one would actually like just take the thing out of me. And then my primary doctor, he was okay though, but the actual specialist just would not do anything for me. Then my primary doctor that I would see for my medication, he finally just took it out just right then and there. He's like, okay. He literally just like took me to a room, propped me on a table, and just cut it out.
Interesting.
Without paying any mind to anything. And then like my friends and family, it just takes forever to actually get anything done.
And you feel, is that a function of like the insurance?
I don't know what it is with the insurance though. I just don't understand why you have to get like 1 million referrals before you can actually get something done, before you're allowed to get a medication or a procedure done.
Interesting. Other takes, experiences? Has it been helpful to you, or you feel like you have this run around?
This isn't myself personally, it's a friend of mine. Just this last week, she was having like a lot of trouble breathing, and it was making her have anxiety attacks. So she went to the doctor, and they basically said like, you have anxiety, you're fine, go home. And then a couple of days later, she was like, I think something's like really wrong. And she went, and she has a pneumonia.
Oh,
and and the first time she went in, I mean, she said she had trouble breathing, and they didn't test her for COVID or anything.
Interesting.
And just sent her home, and then she went back with a pneumonia, and now she owes $12,000.
Okay. Wait, she has $12,000, meaning what?
She owes $12,000 for all of the first trip and the second trip.
12,000.
Yes.
Wow.
That was probably the emergency room.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that emergency care is more expensive than the preventative and primary care.
And she still has to pay for the first trip where they sent her home and like didn't help her.
Interesting. Other experiences? Is that any positive?
I had for many years I had a plan where I had like a preferred provider plan, so I could select my own doctor, and I loved it. And then our work converted to Kaiser because Kaiser's a more affordable plan for us. And at first I just thought, oh my God, I love Kaiser. I love Kaiser. I can hop, first of all, I love my doctor there. Okay. You can hop online, set up an appointment. You don't have to talk to anybody. I No, that's not true. I did have to use their ER once, but I haven't used like their hospital services, but in terms of preventative care, and they're phenomenal. In prescription, I do everything online. It's awesome.
Yeah. Are the good people at Kaiser paying you to say this, Nanette?
No,
Kidding.
no. I'm a straight shooter. I tell
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
No. I think it's a great system. It's probably the closest to a social system, the way we envision it, because it's all under one roof. I had to see I did have to see a cardiologist, and it was just, the appointments were just smooth sailing. It was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think if you can scale out like a Kaiser and make something like that, or that model like national. Yeah, we have Kaiser. I think at least that's what we have from the university. And yeah, I haven't had any complaints. When I need it, it's there. Knock on wood, I haven't had any kind of major issues that have had to be treated. So I don't know on that side. But yeah, I think, again, if you have a good job and if you have a good plan kind of in place, it definitely helps. I think the bigger question is, like, what happens when you don't, right? When you're working part-time, or when you're working, or they don't want to give it to you or whatever. Then your options kind of dwindle, I think, fairly quickly. But Kaiser, like, originally, like, that was the whole idea. Like the literal guy, Kaiser, they created this because he owned factories, like shipyards and whatnot. And this was designed to have like an in-house treatment for his employees. And the idea was that, if his employees had healthcare, they would be healthier, they'd be better workers. And so this was a service or a resource that Kaiser provided. And then like that kind of model of kind of all under one roof goes out. And yeah. Interesting. Other thoughts? Are most of you guys on your parents still, kind of leeching off of them, or anyone had to find their own yet?
I just recently got off my parents a few years ago, and I had to start diving into all this.
Okay.
I just got it this year, actually. I started paying for my own, and I just got like whatever cheap one I was approved for, and it's like $30 a month.
You got like the 99-cent store option?
I literally just tried getting whatever I could because I didn't want to be taxed on not having insurance.
Yeah. And so that probably comes with what, like really high deductibles and copays?
I don't know. I've not been to the doctor.
Jose, let's go. Let's be preventative. Let's be healthy.
I'm not sure like exactly what it covers, because I think it's off of Blue Shield. Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's Blue Shield.
I think that's the other part of this, is that when you have to like navigate this on your own, like, it's super confusing, right? There's so many different things that you're looking at, and not everyone tells you the same things, and you don't know exactly what you should be looking for as like a deal. And so I think, like, you end up kind of going for just a number that looks good for a monthly, which, will probably serve you well when you're young, not so well when you're older. Like when you have to go to the doctor more, and now you're going to pay more for visit. But I think, like that whole system, because there's just so many different options and different kind of people in your ear. It's very confusing. I remember having to kind of look for stuff before we came here, and it's just, like it's frustrating, because like you don't know exactly what you're supposed to be looking for, and what actually is what that's gonna mean in practice, right? Like, what is this gonna mean in a kind of a day-to-day, kind of month-to-month kind of model? Interesting. Any other experiences here?
Well, I wanted to add to your you can't really like choose like, oh, I'm gonna get cancer in 1 year, like, so like just shopping for insurance is tough, and there's not like Amazon where people rate it either.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what always troubles me is just that calculus that people go through, right? Like the gamble that it's a gamble. Like, well, I think I'm going to be healthy for this year, so let me go for a cheaper option, right? in that kind of like calculus of like where do I prioritize health versus where do I prioritize my money? Uh, and that's the thing that's just always, it's the one thing that's always kind of bothered me about this system, because I just don't think that's a normal way to kind of think about the world. But people have to, right? Like there's very real world concerns about what kind of paying for a more expensive plan is going to mean to your monthly budget. Does that mean that you're having to cut back on something else that you either want or need? Uh, and should we have to? And I think this is always the kind of moral argument, at least for a lot of the kind of universal stuff, is that it eases some of that anxiety. Folks that I've talked to that kind of live elsewhere or have these better options, I think that's usually the takeaway, is that they're not worried about going bankrupt, right? And that if they have a cough, they're not worried that they're going to end up with a $12,000 bill or whatever. And I think that peace of mind, like, actually is health too, right? That peace of mind translates into physical health, mental health. That I think is a big part of this as well. I mean, is my take. And you hear these horror stories, right? There's all these horror stories of people. I think health is either number one or number two cause of bankruptcy. That this is just draining people's, if you're unfortunate to have a disease or a condition that's particularly expensive, right? That this just drains through your finances like really quick. And do we end up in those situations because we didn't have good healthcare in the first place, and so we didn't want to go to the doctor, and so we're not catching things early? Like, just the way these things kind of spiral out can be really depressing. I think. I had like a uncle who was, like did tile, was like an independent contractor type. And so didn't have healthcare. It didn't work for a company, so it wasn't provided healthcare, and decided not to, buy it on his own. And like he eventually, and this is a long time ago, but died of a heart attack. And his doctor told my cousin, like my uncle's son, like, this could have been prevented. Like you could have came in and like had these things looked at and whatnot. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that kind of, again, analysis in their life. Like, do I get healthcare? If so, which one? And am I willing to kind of go for the cheaper route, even though that might not be the best for me in terms of my health? And to me, that's always very tragic when people are kind of stuck in that decision-making process. But I'll get off my soapbox. Last question I would have here. Do you all feel like you'll see this happen in your lifetime? Do you feel like we're moving in this direction of kind of adopting a universal healthcare type of plan? Or do you feel like the system will always find ways just to kind of stay in place? Yeah.
I think as long as people focus so much on different types of political parties, it's gonna just kind of put a fog in front of them of what the real issues are at hand. That could just, prevent people from the real progress.
And so then the same system kind of stays in place with maybe some tinkering.
Yeah.
Look at that. We've converted Jose completely into a cynic. Other thoughts? Yeah. Do you feel like this is coming in your lifetime, or are you team Jose here? It's unlikely. No?
But yeah, I don't think anytime soon, and it's definitely going to be very hard to just get through it.
Interesting.
Yeah, just not anytime soon.
And on the other side, you feel like this is a matter of time, that kind of clock is ticking, and we're heading this route? No.
I think if we get into another economic downturn, which they're predicting, what happens is the same thing that happened. It was very tough getting the Affordable Care Act passed. They had to cut a lot of deals. But I think the reason why it passed was because so many people had lost their jobs and had lost their coverage. There was massive unemployment. And it became a really big issue during the presidential race. So I think if we get into another economic downturn, which looks like we may be heading that way, then when people start losing their jobs, like a lot of people start losing their jobs, healthcare does become, not immediately, but
Right.
healthcare does become a really big issue because it is a leading reason why people go bankrupt.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the question there is actually like about now. And so does this experience, both economic and just the kind of public health aspect of this pandemic, does this move the needle at all? I think it's a really interesting question. I do, like in very real ways, we are having discussions at a national level about healthcare and about care and about how that relates, the relationship between health and economics. Like even all these debates about when we should go back, can we go back? These are fundamentally, I would argue, at least in part, arguments about that relationship between care, health, and economics, right? Either you believe that the economics are really important and you're willing to kind of take a health risk to kind of get your money and get the labor or get your work in, or you swing the other direction, because you have the privilege of working in a place like academia where you can do your work online, and so maybe you're more likely to support health over kind of overall economics. But I think for me, what I see at least is that I think that discussion around health and economics is happening, and I think healthcare is very much in the middle of all that. I think we're going to see this, and I think the next point here, kind of talking about the past, I think you're going to see this very much in this election. I think healthcare is going to come up, and it's going to be. On a side note, I think we forget the idea that we're actually in an election year. Like normally, like this part of the year, if we're looking at about to go into May, this is very much would have been peak election campaign stuff. And this would have been all over elections would have been all over the news, all over your social media. I haven't seen like anything, maybe like an article here and there. And so,
Thank goodness.
I mean, maybe, yeah, it's actually kind of nice to a degree. But if and when the election comes back into our public eye again, I think this is going to be one of the central themes, right? That, and I think the other question sociologically here is this pandemic again is what we'd call it's a change agent, right? That it's something that's disrupting our normal kind of flow of all kinds of stuff. And so what happens with that? Does that disruption become the new normal? And do we kind of pick up aspects of that disruption and then apply them into whatever's on the other side of the horizon? Or do we try to kind of just ignore all that and go back to as much as normal as we can? So I think you're going to see this around debates around like the safety net. That what we've seen in this moment is that safety net is expanded. Maybe not enough, but it's definitely expanded. That federal, state governments are looking for ways to support people that are struggling now. Do we hold on to that and say, you know what, we should be doing more of that in a normal circumstance? Or do we just chalk this up to this is a moment of crisis and we're just doing this temporarily? And so I think around same thing you're going to see around health, that as government agencies are starting to kind of call for, funding for testing and kind of covering the cost of testing for individuals, does that start applying to the cost of actually treating COVID-19? Well, once we have that precedent down, do people expect that once we get on the other side of this? And so if they've seen the government step up and kind of take a larger role in healthcare, do they expect that role now to translate on the other side of this? And so I can definitely see that scenario. Whether or not that'll happen is very much open to debate. But there's definitely like a lane there you can see actually opening up where maybe because of this experience, the kind of just how precarious people are kind of financially and how that financial is very much tied to health. Maybe this means a kind of a increase in support for universal health care. So I think you're going to see this on the campaign though. And so whether or not either candidate kind of shifts and kind of adopts kind of a more universal healthcare platform, I think will be interesting.
So I want to go back to a comment you made about the current state of affairs and how the big topic right now is When do we all go back to normal life? And I've been working remotely for almost 6 weeks. When do we go back? And I listened to a 4-hour-long Board of Supervisors meeting here in our county yesterday. And I'll have to tell you that there were small business owners, several that spoke about how this has ruined their livelihood. And it was compelling. The economics of this is compelling. At the same time, people's lives are on the line. It's a very serious virus.
Yeah.
And some people take it a little more serious than others. My son said that when the fall comes, when flu season comes, COVID's coming back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the topic of the day, is economics versus public health. And how do you make a decision to put your employees back in a space, in a congregate space, knowing that the numbers are still growing?
Yeah. No, I think it speaks to, again, sociologically, people don't know an alternative, right? That is a legitimate kind of debate. And I think for people who are, again, who have lived their whole lives depending on economics in a very particular way, in a very particular economic system, I think what this thing has shown people in the kind of outside of academia is just how all of this stuff is a house of cards, right? All these things that we think are solid, like the economy is always going to be there, it's always been there. It's not. It's all dependent on people going to work and people buying things at the end of the day. A very simple equation, right? And any disruption into that. And at the end of the day, this is what this is. It's a disruption in that flow. It's making it harder to buy things. It's making it harder to kind of make things in a very kind of just very basic way, right? Like just that very kind of fundamental disruption is throwing everything into chaos. And I think that's something that social scientists have always kind of argued, right? That these things are all very social more than they're more abstract than they are real, right? We've arbitrarily kind of as a society have decided that money is a thing, right? But that's not biological, that's not genetic. We have decided that this thing has value and you can exchange it for these other things. But then when the kind of real world, the natural world comes in and says, I don't care about that, you see just how artificial all that is. But it doesn't make it any less real, right? That your livelihood is dependent on it. But I can argue this till I'm blue in the face and argue that money doesn't really matter, but PG&E is still expecting me to give them money at the end of the month, right? To kind of have my electricity on. Even though there's no kind of fundamental reason for that, it's just we've agreed on all this, it's still a reality. But I think you see the sociology in this, that I think personally, I think it's ridiculous when you have people who are saying that, these comments or these kind of quotes about, life shouldn't matter that much or whatever. Well, you can understand where they're coming from, right? That they are very much dependent on a very particular economic system. And this thing is disrupting that. And if you are individually allowed to kind of persevere through all this and you are at less risk, then yeah, maybe the idea of going back isn't the worst thing in the world. Or if you need it, those businesses, if they need it, it goes back to that calculus, right? I would imagine a lot of these people recognize by opening up again, they are putting themselves at risk, right? Opening up a restaurant.
Yeah. One of the small business owners, she's a sole support for her family.
Yeah.
She was begging. She said, I will do anything you ask me to do to be able to reopen my business. Only for us to find out 4 hours later that the county board of supervisors has absolutely zero authority. It's the governor that makes the decision. But they're begging. They're begging because it's not just about losing their business. It's about losing their homes. They're not being able to take care of their families. I'm a proponent of public health and public safety, but I don't have on the line what these people have on the line. It was sad to hear. It was hard to hear.
Yeah, 100%, I agree. I get it. But also like under the underlying kind of idea there is that that person, whether they recognize it or not, I'm guessing they do, but opening up does mean in a very real way that they are putting themselves in a health risk, right? That for all their kind of immediate economic concerns, like those concerns may be moot, like in a month or two, if you end up with a disease that's kind of threatening your life, right? And that's, yeah, there's no easy way out of that. Like there's no kind of easy solution to that. But again, I think these are very structural problems that we are very dependent on a very particular way of kind of doing and organizing our lives. And this is a thing that doesn't care about that, right? But this is a natural effect of the world that doesn't care about money, that doesn't care about jobs, doesn't care about that. It's a naturally occurring thing that's, creates its own kind of level of chaos. So how do you do that? How do you marry something that's inherently chaotic to like an actual structured system, right? Like we have a very structured system that things have to kind of move in very specific ways for everything to keep on going. What happens when that outside world comes in and doesn't understand or respect structure? And I think this is the inherent kind of struggle that for much of our lifetimes, we've been able to kind of keep that unstructured world at bay, right? We've been able to limit disease. We've been able to limit kind of even the effects of natural disasters to a degree, at least if you're in the Western world. And so we've been able to kind of hold that structure kind of in place. I think this is probably one of the first times, definitely in our lifetimes, where that kind of chaos has actually challenged structure in a very fundamental way. And it has very real world impacts in terms of like your ability to pay your bills, to keep your family going, to eat. But yeah, there's no easy answer to all of that. Awkward place to end on. That, yeah, either we're all going to go broke or we all might die. But yeah, no easy answers here. But I think, again, one of the things that you see in this moment is that, again, these kind of questions about structure in agency, even about like what can you do, when are you kind of supposed to kind of just follow the rules in essence. I think all these things are playing out like in real time, and they're playing out like in just kind of one after another, right? You're just seeing so many aspects of things that we've been talking about in the abstract that are actually kind of hitting home in very direct ways if you're paying attention. And so, try to apply your thinking, your training as much as possible. I'll stick around for a few more minutes if people have questions to kind of wrap up what we talked about at the beginning. Again, pushing the first draft due date back to the 5th, cutting out the topical Crazy 3. Yeah. Any other general questions? So be healthy, be safe. Again, I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone has more specific questions. But yeah, have a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hands at the camera.
I have a question.
Sure.
In regards to like the research paper, am I allowed to include testimonials?
Meaning what?
Like, because I'm doing my research paper on like the effectiveness of DACA,
Okay.
and I have several like friends that are DACA recipients, and I was wondering if I can add that into the research paper.
You can definitely include that. Again, you don't want that to be like the whole essay.
Oh, no.
But definitely